Vamos con la tercera ponencia de la mañana y justo después vamos a tener tiempo para tomar un café. El tercer ponente de esta mañana es José María Ezquiaga, que es arquitecto, sociólogo, ha liderado el urbanismo en Madrid y ha fundado su propia oficina de planificación. Tiene numerosos premios en España, también en Europa, y destaca por su visión integral del urbanismo y de la transformación territorial. José María viene a hablar de la ciudad que queremos, una propuesta de reflexión, dice José María, desde Tenerife. Bienvenido, muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. Hasta por aquí, ¿no? Que de repente pensé.
With us today.
Bienvenido.
Welcome.
Pensé, lo estoy presentando y se va.
Muy bien. Sí. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be here with you and to be here in the Canary Islands. I have visited Tenerife before for a number of reasons. Thank you to the foundation, the city council, all the sponsors for this event, and congratulations on the initiative. I think we've already seen this morning that this is a very stimulating topic. We've been looking at the value of ideas put forward by Carlos. We've been on the scene for a long time now, working in both sides of the Atlantic. We admire Carlos's work a great deal. It's always full of ideas, full of inspiration. We've actually worked together on in Villa Verde, for example, and we are fully aware of the importance of measuring these ideas. So I'm going to talk about the city that we want, and how to inspire and how to transform the tools that we do have, this urban plan, to be in line with these values. We need to do this in a very objective way, measuring, evaluating, monitoring all of the questions that we ask ourselves. So our starting point this morning for my presentation is going to look at 10 key issues that are key when rethinking the paradigm of urban planning in Spain. Some of you are experts in this area, but if not, then let me just say that we're at a real turning point in our urban planning thinking process. There's big change compared to the last century. In Europe in the 50s, we did what we could. Now we're facing a new crisis between the intellectual capacity that we have to think, to diagnose the cities that we have, and the governance itself. Coordination between different parts of the administration. So transferring knowledge to decision-making in the political sphere. Just to give you an example which might help you to understand what I'm trying to say. Some time ago, I met with the American Association in New York. We were talking about disasters, Sandy, Tokyo, among many others. And I had to talk about the Dana in Valencia. We had been working with Miriam Garcia, who's here actually today. And it's difficult to find a place in Spain where there is greater concern about the problems associated to these climate risks, such as flooding. There is a specific territorial plan in this area focused on the risks of flooding. From 2003, it was revised in 2015, but at the level of governance, what's happening? Yes, it's been addressed, but there wasn't a metropolitan plan in place. And the municipal plans that weren't used dated from the 90s. So 35 years ago, before Google even existed. How can it be possible that we have artificial intelligence now that detects risks, but we're using plans at governance level that date from the pre-digital age? How is this possible? How can we warn citizens? Well, listening to these North Americans, I realized that, for instance, this warning around 4 million people in Spain live in flood risk areas. But do they know? Should they know? And this is one of the problems that I wanted to talk about today. That said, let's look at our urbanized world. Carlos said we live in cities these days, the majority of us.
Tuve la ocasión de trabajar en relación con la gestación de la agenda urbana en la época que estaba Joan Clos al frente de Renewable y luego en el grupo motor de la agenda urbana española donde me tocó el tema 10.
Working group that I was a part of in the 10th issue and the strategic document of Tenerife is structured around 2 lines. Improve structure for governance.
And it was quite a revolution. It was a new model, but we also needed to create new tools. That's clear. We need to renew the tools. Or many of these elements won't be feasible. In the Spanish case, the United Nations agenda stated that it was absolutely important, fundamental, that municipalities would have the necessary legal framework. And within this crisis, we needed to find answers. Here in Spain, we have this municipal planning, but there is not really a belief in them, and they're out of date. In the case of the Dana, it was very clear. But here in Spain, we have a land use law from 2001, but only around 20% of the territory is adapted. The rest is adapted to a law from 2001. So the planning is not happening. If we want to envision future sceneries, we cannot do it with this outdated plan. However, it's still legislating how we use our land. We need this muscle. We need some work that you can see on the screen right now. We need new goals. And from my perspective, these goals need to be tools that serve as a source of inspiration for new legal frameworks. Right now, we are at a very interesting co-living stage. We have different municipalities who are feeling quite reticent to renewing their plans. We have this next generation funds from the ministry, and they are starting to focus on urban planning. However, here in Tenerife, you can see a strategic plan, but also this urban planning plan. Shouldn't it be strategic? Shouldn't it be one and the same? Yes. But does the Canary Island law allow it? No. So we would need to modify the law. In other regions in Spain, we can see examples where they have worked first with the law, with the urban planning and soil use. And it's interesting to listen to Margarita, to Carlos Moreno, who really feed us this content for these plans. But that convergence requires a new type that will be the synthesis of new plans. We will have the strategic plan with the intention that future plans will talk about what's important. Right now, it seems like the trivialities are at the core for plans, and That's something I really wanted to highlight before we continue. So what would that change of paradigm look like? The first point would be this one. The ruling paradigm is that plans are being used in order to regulate the use of land. I studied political sciences, so for me it was quite easy to learn about the legal terminology and framework and the way it works, but it's something quite intrinsic to Spain. In France too, with Rivillon, we can see how everything is affecting urbanism. All these legal frameworks are affecting urbanism as maybe some cigarettes might affect all health. So here, Margarita, you can see Vitruvio. Some of the things you said are not part of innovation, but many of those that have been forgotten. For Vitruvio, the sun, the wind, that was key while thinking about architecture. Industrial cities encompass new challenges, and within this picture, usually I dive into what happened, how the Thames was contaminated, polluted. They were throwing dirty water into the Thames, and in the end, urbanism started to respond to these situations, not to rule over the distribution of rights, but in order to ensure, to guarantee the right to live. We are not talking about some sort of God's powered plan. It's just finding solutions in places where maybe we could already find a phone line, but we weren't able to have a sanitized environment. Margarita mentioned this architecture with big windows that really wants to get that air flowing within the buildings. Here you can see a picture from 1940. This is a graph from Alvar Aalto. In the past picture, you could see what overcrowding looked like. Later on, we see that revolution we inherited from contemporary architecture. But what can we expect? On one side, the utopia of living up to 100 years. And who can we trust with this? Technology, which is a mistake. Later on, I will tell you why. Or lifestyles are absolutely important. What's the most important indicator for urban quality? And I agree with Jean-Claude. Life expectancy. There is no better synthetic indicator. There is no life expectancy. Then everything else becomes less important. So we need to understand that this person, you can see there on that icon, this obese person walking at a computer and moving around with a car. We have trusted technology with this task. It has helped us overcome the pandemic. But here we can see low technology, and unless we work on that, we won't be able to live up to 100 years with high technology. We'll have healthcare problems. We will have cancer cases, also problems with the lungs, with all circulatory system and hearts. Here you can see these are pictures from the Second World War, and it comes to show what a healthy environment looks like. On the first image, you can see social housing in quite a privileged space. The technology of 1940s, the WCs, the individual bathroom, the sinks, that dignified labor and workspace. Have you seen pictures of what workshops look like, of what factories look like? How can we have these spaces where we spend so much of our life look this way? They also mentioned schools, education, its importance, as well as food. These points are all a plan or a part of urbanism. The second point is sustainability and ecosystemic limits. It's quite difficult to measure those limits. Many politicians say they have a sustainable plan, but how can we measure that? How do we know if we're moving forward or we're moving backwards? We have in Gran Canaria, in Las Palmas, I participated in an event, and one of the teachers, one of the reporters, asked a question that only her experience allowed us to ask. How were you able to understand that operation of mitigation, or rather adaptation? When did you think that we have to adapt? When did you recognize that? That we have to break down dams like New York did, or we have to build them so that they would avoid another Sandy. Sandy was a real disruption of urban plans, and COVID looked like a challenge, but New York showed how density is powerful, how proximity is a key factor. They would have one hospital on another and another, and that was more powerful than the model of Los Angeles. At the beginning, it seemed like the model of Los Angeles was the final hero, the final savior against pandemics. Now we also have the energy recoupling. And ideas such as this need to be key within planning. But now we could have general plans. We might not be mentioning health, or we might even not include some of the topics we have here. They would be abiding by the law. These would be general plans, and they would be usable. Now, green infrastructure. That's some of a marketing concept. And why? Well, protecting our green spaces is key. But why green infrastructures? It's like we're moving up a level between lineal structures, technologies, and that green infrastructure allows us to rethink as a green being the backbone, being something positive that we can implement within all of the structures. Here you can see Madrid. This is a very big project we're developing, and we are thinking from the ground up. We look at the topography, about the biography of that geography, and later on we design what would happen. This refinery should also be used with this method. Already started taking a look at it and how it was in the past. We need to regenerate the memory of the space so that we will have the geographical clues on what the future will look like. It could be a reference on what we can build. Landscapes too. Miriam is a teacher on this, so I won't be delving more into it. And then we also have the third point, resilience and climate change. It's obvious that we're at this point that journalist was quite right to highlight that we're not talking about mitigation, but adaptation. This is a picture from Medellin in Colombia. And it's something that happens every year. Here in Spain, we are quite shocked because not used to this sort of natural happenings like Dana. That happened around the south. If it would have happened in the northern part, it would have could have even been worse. And we were impressed by what happened. We were shocked. I only have a few minutes left, but I want to really show you how dependent we are of those vehicles. All these people, these dramatic stories that how they were not able to go to work anymore because they didn't have a car. We are a protected country with regards to jobs, so many of them didn't. For many of them, it wasn't as bad as it would have been for people in America, where they would have had to face hunger even due to this lack of being able to go to the work. On this fourth point, the third city, where we think about balanced distribution. Urban planning is the best way to achieve it, as well as with a coercive normative way. These are the maps from Madrid. Here you can see that it's in mathematical equations. We have maps from the 30s, where in the south of Madrid, in the Lavapiés neighborhood, we had the highest mortality risk. However, now it has changed thanks to public goods. It's not as deeply linked with the residency or the neighborhood anymore. Now there is an opportunity to work with open data from the country treasury and with different accounts of Spain, and we can compare that data with any other set of data. And the results are just astonishing. Here in Tenerife, fragmentation is absolutely key. It's in one part voluntary, and architects are at fault here. In the 50s, 60s, we can see how the rural area could have been kept together with the city lives, but here you can see also how that utopia from the houses leads. Here you can see a comparison between Houston and Madrid. At times, I don't tell anyone what is what, and with our students, we try and guess what is Houston and what is Madrid. And the islands, having these spaces is a tragedy. This fragmentation. We need to find a system of populating with some sort of roots within the territory that is organizing the distribution of houses. Now, in the past, we could find smaller houses within those roots, but now we can even find whole malls determined by small mobility and also larger mobilities, roads on schemes. Well, I'm running out of time. I think I have no more time left. Well, this is the topic of complex city. We're still working with the current urban planning on the separation of uses, and it's real strategy how we are regulating use of spaces. And something that was highlighted during COVID is how this proximity city needs to be rethought. Here's a book, forward by Jangel, teacher from Copenhagen in Denmark, who has also shared many ideas about the use of public spaces. He spoke about the life between buildings at a time when no architect would wonder about what happened outside their projects. And here you can see what it looks like. Here, there you have a bakery. Of course, I also had to mention this proximity city. And of course, here a picture of New York at the beginning of the 20th century shows how roads have been key within our city lives. At the beginning, when there were no cars, no vehicles, urban planners would measure these 15 minutes, and they would do it in a quite beautiful way. They would understand that a neighborhood was the maximum amount of distance a child can move in to go without their parents to their school. Nowadays, we wouldn't even allow our children to go on their own to school. At least in Madrid, it would be unthinkable. So what we're trying to do is to look to the past and try to recover that way of planning or thinking. From the 40s onwards, we're stigmatizing roads. Of course, we're not talking about the utopia of green spaces, but this is the space where they moved around. These are the pioneers, the fathers or grandparents. Carlos already mentioned distance in the case of some cities like Madrid and the city center. We already have this. However, urban planning seems to be destroying this instead of consolidating this balanced scheme. If we have a school or laundries or a supermarket or a gym or a mall, we need it to be compatible. We need to understand that the most lucrative setting will be displacing the least lucrative one. If we care for something, we should protect it. We should take care of it in some way or another. And well, last but not least, we have the 8th point, affordable housing and residential quality as a condition for urban well-being. We can see that the distribution is similar. There is a higher lack of employment. Surprisingly, there are less foreigners, but there is a housing problem. Campamento isn't as big as the refinery, but this soil needs to be regenerated. Of course, there's also a process of eliminating pollution, which is not as serious as in the case of the refinery, but still, for 15 years, nothing has been happening. And of course, also natality. That's another element that Margarita, Lacatoni, Basal shared. This idea that homes like the one you can see in the background, can be transformed into house and homes like the one you could see on the front. And well, this is now I'm reaching the end. Putting people first, the diversity. Point number 9, here you can see a standard family. This is a building, the Tower of El Puerto in Las Palmas. And we can find 2 collectives who have been specially left behind in cities, or children and or elderly. Or children, which would be all parents, spending their childhood in Madrid, going to the schools. I'm quite surprised while looking at this picture, and I've seen it many times, is how those 2 kids at the right side, maybe they're 5, 6 years old, and they're walking on their own to school. Maybe those are young parents, and would you allow them to go alone to school on their own? All these risks we might imagine, all these movies that might go through our mind. There is also this idea of this urban childhood, how they changed the Guadalajara square. Van Eyck would have noticed that children need to play in those squares. And here they use those spaces in order to play. Of course, this forgotten childhood has been very present in the past. The previous picture was about COVID. Here we see another picture about how elderly have been forgotten in the past. And there are many things to be analyzed at micro level and the macro level. Here you can see how the X generation will be already retired by then. We have not thought about the revolution that will be happening. However, we cannot. I took this picture actually in Arganzuela in Madrid before they put some soil over those train tracks. They were not only at risk of being of a bus crashing against them, but even a train. And there we have a quote, oh, imagine the time where we had stairs. Now we can move around better. Well, and here, these are some other pictures on mobility, how we need to go back to basics and give the cities back to the children and the elderly, and to those details. On that second level of this inverted pyramid, it's still key to understand how to organize the city for short distances and longer distances. This is in Denmark, where they have an adopted, that mother has an adopted bike to stroll around with the kids. However, bikes are quite aggressive in Copenhagen. You probably have noticed this. If not, try and stay within a bicycle lane. So they have decided to separate people walking on foot from people moving on bikes. And that's how urban planning needs to work. They need to learn about what is happening and adapt according to it. Renaturalization of cities can also be something on which we can learn of, to turn need into a virtue. We have many spaces, ravines in the island that can be reused, that could be even converted into green spaces. Here you can see also the green ring in Copenhagen and the Greater London Plan. In Madrid, we want to have this big metropolitan forest. But Nagan Combin already designed this green ring that still exists nowadays. Here you can see one of the development plans in one of the municipalities that wants to completely change the way the city is designed. Here you can also see the regeneration that is a source of optimism for Tenerife. You can transform your territories, and here you can see a clear example with the Manzanares River. Of course, always keep in mind that regeneration, urban regeneration plans are expensive, and social justice is not free. It requires an investment, an important budget, and a clear idea of urban justice while distributing those costs and while facilitating those cities to become change and transform. Thank you.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a José María. Con él finalizamos este primer bloque.
Thank you, José María. This brings this first topic to a close. Sustainable urban planning. We will have a chance to talk to all of these speakers later at a round table, and you will have a chance to ask whatever questions you may have. Interesting to see what was in the area of the refinery before the refinery. 1930 was when it was inaugurated. Before that, it was farming lands on the outskirts of Santa Cruz.